Judgment on whether to continue the controversial 1990s arms deal trial involving former President Jacob Zuma and French arms company Thales will be made in the High Court sitting in Pietermaritzburg. Well, that was the expectation, at least up until the judge made an about turn and instead made this be about himself and whether or not he should recuse himself, and asking the parties there to make submissions as to whether he should continue presiding over this trial. Let's touch base now with our colleague Ziyanda Ngcobo, who is outside the Pietermaritzburg High Court. Ziyanda, good morning to you. You and I, we contemplated this particular question at the start of the broadcast of this show, and perhaps we are people who make predictions nowadays. There it is. Judge Piet Koen is asking the legal teams whether or not to recuse himself. Give us the history here. What comments did he make, and why would he contemplate recusing himself from this case?
You'll remember, Koli, on Monday that this was precipitated by the fact that State Prosecutor Billy Downer, when this was meant to have been a day just to deal with the state of play in terms of the preparedness to start the trial, at some stage then went on to make arguments as to why this trial should no longer be postponed, that this court has a duty to make a determination and put an end to the former President's so-called Stalingrad approach. However, Zuma's legal team then responded to this to say, well, they actually has not been a formal, postponement application, because there was no need to have one, because this day was meant to have been a holding date. Now, this was on Monday. And so in light of now the private prosecution that's been brought against Billy Downer, as well as the direct leave to appeal, the application that's been filed by former President Jacob Zuma at the Constitutional Court, it was at that stage on Monday already, Koli, that we got an indication from Judge Piet Koen on his discomfort, if I could put it that way, on continuing or being the right person to make that determination, because of the fact that that application in the Con Court is going to be with regards to pronouncements that he has made on Billy Downer continuing with this trial and therefore how this trial proceeds. And so today, when Judge Koen then returned, to which we expected to be a judgment on whether or not this matter should be postponed, Judge Piet Koen said the following, that there have been developments that have brought into sharp focus whether or not he should continue presiding over this matter. That's the private prosecution I've mentioned, including as well then, whether or not it would make the trial fair and constitutional. And so on that basis, he's called upon both legal teams on or before the 3rd of November to submit, written submissions on whether or not they believe he should recuse himself for this matter. And then on the 30th of January, we'll hear judgment then on whether or not, after having considered both sides, whether or not Judge Piet Koen will be recusing himself from this trial altogether.
Any of the legal parties involved here, Ziyanda, at court, and what has been their reaction?
There was no need for, the senior counsel to be here. It's largely the attorneys who were here in court and not the advocates and the SCs, just primarily because it was just the handing down of the judgment. The reasons will also be sent to them, and that's why the court proceedings ended so quickly. It was just to hand down the order. I think at best it was, prudent for Judge Piet Koen to at least outline why now this has turned and become an issue about recusal and not necessarily about the postponement of the trial at this stage, because he has to now consider whether or not his presiding over this matter will constitute a fair trial, taking into consideration, Koli, that if Judge Piet Koen had decided not to consider recusing himself from this matter, this could have possibly brought upon an application because of the conflicts of interest that would have existed if he did decide to, for instance, say, well, this this trial is going to go ahead regardless of what's happening in the constitutional courts. But also, it's fundamental to distinguish between an adjournment and a postponement. So the trial has just been adjourned to the 30th of January to determine the recusal aspects of it. If Judge Piet Koen decides that he's not going to recuse himself from this trial, then on the 30th we could also very well see, again now, arguments as to whether or not this trial should continue going ahead. Presumably at that time the Court would have also made a determination on, the leave to appeal application by the former president. But also, on the 8th and 9th of December is also when that private prosecution, there was an application brought by Karen Moore and Billy Downer to dismiss the entire private prosecution. So these are all the moving parts that are coalescing and need to be considered. So by the 30th then, there will be a much clearer picture on where we're going with this matter.
Very interesting turn of events there. Ziyanda, Ngcobo, let's leave it there for the time being.